Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Patrick Moore, and he's the author of the book Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, among your other books that you've released. Thanks again for coming on. I'm sorry I had to interrupt you there, but you were we were talking about CO2 contributors, and I believe we were talking about shellfish.
Yes, when modern life emerged, multicellular life, it was all like a jellyfish. There were no shells on any of the marine organisms early on. But many different species learned to take calcium and carbon dioxide from the seawater and make calcium carbonate and build a protective shell for themselves. It's like a knight in armor. And it really made a big difference to their ability to prevent being eaten by something else. And coral reefs are the same. They're embedded in a calcium carbonate matrix, which is actually the bulk of their whole thing, but it's inorganic. It's not living. The coral reef, it's a rock, and limestone is calcium carbonate, what we make cement with. 10% of our CO2 emissions are from cement manufacturing. 90% are from fossil fuels, the gas and the oil and the coal. But what we're doing is replenishing the CO2 in the atmosphere, which was taken out in the first place by these forms of life. And, trees are what made the coal, basically. And during a period of the Carboniferous era, when trees piled up on top of each other, great giant coal seams were produced at that time. About 50% of all the coal was produced then, when forests emerged on the land. And so we have all this history. We know that the CO2 that's in the fossil fuels came from the atmosphere and the oceans in the first place, and that we are simply replacing it where life was thriving under those conditions at the time.
Now, I know some of the viewers are going to hear this, and I mean, I've done a lot of reading in this department, so it's not necessarily shocking to me, but some of our viewers will say, well, this is completely running contra to what we're hearing in the mainstream media or from our politicians or from even activist groups. They'll say, well, where do you get your information? You're a scientist, but where do you get your information? How do we trust this information, or how do we trust this science?
If you read my book, you will see the references to the original material for all of these issues. It is a fact that CO2 was once 5 to 10,000 parts per million in the global atmosphere, and life thrived during those periods. It is also a fact that 50 million years ago, the Eocene thermal maximum was one of the warmest times in Earth's history, and life thrived through that. Ice is the enemy of life. How many species are there in Antarctica?
Very few. And
a few species of penguins. And they depend on the sea for their food, not the ice. There's nothing growing there.
So let's talk about the polar bears then for a moment, because your unified theory of scare stories is interesting to me. If you cannot see something or touch it or feel it, how does one measure it? And a lot of us just accept, oh, right, I haven't been to the Arctic. If there's a depletion of polar bears, well, I suppose there is. But you're suggesting, well, no, there isn't. So are polar bears going extinct?
In 1973, all polar nations, on the advice of wildlife biologists who said overhunting was causing a reduction in the population, signed a treaty to end the unrestricted hunting of polar bears. Since then, their population has increased by at least 4 to 5 times. They are doing very well now because there's less ice in the summer in the Arctic. Only about half the Arctic is still covered in ice during the peak of the summer months. There's 6 months of sunshine 24/7 and then 6 months of darkness 24/7 above the Arctic Circle. It's a very different kind of environment than we live in.
Right.
But now that the ocean is a bit more open, the sun can hit the water and grow the plankton. That's the basis of the food chain in the Arctic. There's not much growing on the land. It's so cold.
So the polar bears are doing well.
Yes, the polar bears are fat and happy all across the whole Arctic. There's as many as 30 to 50,000 of them now. There were only 8 to 10,000 when they signed the treaty.
And from what I understand, that some of the Inuit have concerns about actually, in fact, of overabundance of polar bears, and they're becoming threats to some of the native communities up there.
Yes, the Inuit government in Inuit, sorry, I get that name wrong, signed a law into effect not that long ago, two years ago or so, to allow people to protect themselves from polar bears. Up until then, it would have been illegal to kill a polar bear that was coming into your house and threatening your children. But they made it so you can protect yourself now. Not one newspaper in Canada carried that story.
My goodness.
No, not one single newspaper carried the story of them saying there was too many bears.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. We've got to cut to commercial. We'll be right back.